Today, we're going to look into 4 horrifying cave disaster stories. Let's begin with the first one. Trapped in darkness, the rescue of Morris Batesold became one of the most amazing survival stories ever told. Imagine being stuck in a space so tight you can't move your arms, so narrow that every breath is a struggle, so dark that you can't see your own hands. And worst of all, you're upside down, slowly making you dizzy and confused. In 2009, you may have heard of something similar happening about the Nutty Putty Cave incident. A man named John Edward Jones experienced this nightmare in that cave in Utah. The tunnel was barely 10 inches wide, about the size of a small pizza. He was trapped upside down for more than 24 hours while rescuers tried everything to save him. Despite their best efforts, John died in that dark, lonely place. His body remains there to this day, with the cave sealed shut like a tomb. Now imagine that same terrible fear, but happening to a 15-year-old boy. In 1965, a teenager named Morris Batesold went into a cave called Wildcat Cave near Cleveland, Ohio. He was young, skinny, and full of the spirit of adventure that makes teenagers feel invincible. But one wrong turn changed everything for Morris. Just like John would do decades later, Morris slid into a tiny crack and got stuck. Upside down, in the cold, in the dark, with seemingly no way out. No one could hear his screams. He couldn't move his arms. Every breath was harder than the last as the rock pressed against his chest. The weight of Earth itself seemed to be squeezing the life out of him. But unlike John's story, Morris's tale would have a different ending. What happened next became one of the most amazing rescues in Ohio history. A brave and fast-moving effort that had the whole country watching and hoping he would make it out alive. The cave and the boy, in Cleveland's Hinckley Reservation, there was a mysterious opening in the hillside called Wildcat Cave. Its rocky entrance looked like a giant open mouth in the sandstone cliff, calling to adventurous souls. Local kids had explored it for generations, drawn by its dark passages and hidden chambers. Some even claimed the cave had once been part of the Underground Railroad, hiding people escaping slavery on their journey north to freedom in Canada. On that fateful October day in 1965, 15-year-old Morris Batesold, a skinny boy, about 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighing only 108 pounds, felt the pull of the cave once again. As he rode past it on a yellow school bus, looking out the window at the familiar hills, he saw another chance for adventure. This time, he planned to go deeper into the cave than he ever had before. Morris wasn't supposed to be at the cave that day at all. He and 15 other kids from the Methodist Children's Home in Berea, along with 3 teachers, were actually scheduled to visit Schönbrunn Village, a historic site. But fate stepped in when their bus got a flat tire on the road. Because of this unexpected problem, they had to change plans quickly and ended up at the nearby park in Medina County instead. Seeing this unexpected opportunity, Morris and 2 of his friends decided to slip away and explore Wildcat Cave. The boys had been there before, but they always wanted to see what was around the next bend, what secrets the darkness might be hiding. With excitement and a touch of nervousness, Morris and his friends approached the cave opening. The autumn air was chilly, with temperatures hovering just above freezing. Dead leaves crunched under their shoes as they walked toward the dark mouth of the cave. None of them had proper equipment. No helmets, no ropes, no flashlights. Just teenage confidence and curiosity. The boys crawled past a large slanted rock where the cave entrance narrowed dramatically to about 12 inches wide, just the width of a ruler. The sandstone walls felt rough against their hands and knees. Sharp rocks cut into Morris's skin as he pushed forward, but he kept going, driven by determination and the thrill of exploration. Then Morris made a decision that would change his life. At a fork in the passage, instead of going straight ahead with his friends, he turned left into an even narrower crack. It wasn't really a path at all, just a tight space between rocks that seemed to lead somewhere new. His friends continued on their normal route, not noticing that Morris had gone a different way. Now separated from his companions, Morris kept crawling downward at a slight angle. The beams of afternoon sunlight from the entrance faded behind him until he was in complete darkness. He didn't know he had gone the wrong way. As he moved forward using just his legs to push himself along, the space got tighter and tighter with each foot. A feeling of unease began to grow in his stomach, but he pushed it aside. Soon he reached a section where huge boulders pressed in from both sides. He took a deep breath, making himself as small as possible, and slid into the crack. He thought maybe the main cave was just beyond this tight spot. But suddenly, a rock shifted slightly and squeezed him even tighter. He tried to keep moving forward, but the pressure only increased. Then, he hit a dead end. Solid rock blocked his path completely. Morris tried to back up, but it was too late. He was now trapped upside down, about 60 feet underground, in total darkness. Anytime he struggled or moved, the rock seemed to squeeze him harder, as if the cave itself was trying to keep him. He couldn't use his arms at all. They were pinned to his sides. Breathing became harder with each passing minute as the pressure on his chest increased, and no one could hear him yell for help. Who was Morris? So who was this boy now fighting for his life in the darkness? Morris Batesold was just a regular teenager who had already faced many challenges in his young life. When he was only 5 years old, his parents went through a difficult divorce. Morris and his older brother Donald were sent to live in a foster home at the Methodist Children's Home. Despite this tough start, the brothers remained close and dreamed of starting a business together someday when they grew up. Morris was generally quiet and sensitive. He had started smoking cigarettes at age 13, like many teenagers in the 1960s. The cave was actually a favorite hiding spot for kids trying to smoke away from the watchful eyes of adults. Morris had been inside Wildcat Cave several times before, and even once got accidentally left behind by his friends, though he found his way out without problems that time. Now, those previous adventures seemed like nothing compared to his current situation. As minutes turned into hours, Morris began to wonder if he would ever see daylight again. The alarm is raised 2 hours after he went into the cave. Morris's friends finally realized he was missing. Worried, they told one of their teachers, William Powell. Powell was a responsible adult who immediately understood the seriousness of the situation. He was about the same size as Morris, so he volunteered to go into the cave to search for the missing boy. Even with directions from the other boys, it was extremely difficult to navigate the dark, twisting passages. Finally, after crawling through several narrow spaces, Powell and the boys followed the sound of Morris's faint voice to a narrow crack in the rock. Powell could see Morris's feet in the dim light, but the space was far too small for him to reach the trapped boy. He could only talk to Morris and try to keep him calm from about 10 feet away. "I'm stuck bad," Morris called out, his voice shaking. "I can't move at all." Powell tried to reassure him. "We're going to get help, Morris. Just stay calm and keep talking to us." As soon as he realized how serious the situation was, Powell sent one of the boys to call for emergency help. Within an hour, firefighters from the Hinckley Fire Department arrived, led by Chief Paul Chodera. They quickly assessed the situation and tried the most obvious solution first, pulling Morris out with hooks and a belt. But when they tried to pull, the belt broke, and Morris slid even deeper into the crack, making his situation even worse. It was becoming clear that this rescue would be far more complicated than anyone had initially thought. As word spread about the trapped boy, more help arrived. They brought in a portable generator to power lights inside the cave. They gave Morris oxygen through a thin tube to help him breathe in the tight space. They used small electric heaters to fight the cold. Temperatures inside the cave were close to freezing, and hypothermia was becoming a serious concern. Some people suggested drilling through the stone from above to reach Morris, but experts from a local quarry warned that could cause the cave to collapse. Using explosives was also considered but deemed too dangerous. They would have to find another way. As night fell, a huge crowd gathered outside the cave. Over 200 people, including rescue workers, family members, and newspaper reporters. Local clubs and organizations brought hot coffee, sandwiches, and blankets for the rescuers and family members. The story quickly made headlines across the country, and it was even featured on national television news. Local radio stations broadcast urgent appeals for help from small-sized volunteers who might be able to reach Morris in the tight space. One person who answered the call was a nurse named Evelyn Pinky Pettit. Standing only 5'2" and weighing just 85 pounds, she drove all the way from Akron to help. Pinky bravely crawled into the cave and managed to get within 5 feet of Morris. Although she couldn't quite reach him, she stayed there for 3 hours, talking to him and providing comfort. "You're going to be okay, honey," she told him. "We've got lots of people working to get you out." Meanwhile, an experienced caver named Terry Brown arrived and created a pulley system with a metal ring attached to the cave roof. Rescuers pulled with all their might, but Morris only moved a few inches before getting stuck again. The long night. All through the night, people worked in shifts to keep Morris's spirits up. They asked him questions about school and his hobbies. They made jokes to distract him from his fear. They had him count numbers to stay awake and alert. They even promised him a big steak dinner if he made it out. A powerful motivation for a hungry teenage boy. "What's the first thing you want to do when you get out?" one rescuer asked. "Eat a hamburger," Morris replied weakly, "and never go in a cave again." As the hours passed, Morris drifted in and out of consciousness. His voice grew fainter. The rock continued to press against his chest, making each breath more difficult than the last. His body temperature was dropping despite the heaters. Time was running out. Hope arrives. By the next morning, Morris had been stuck upside down for 24 long hours. He was growing weaker with each passing hour. The situation was becoming desperate. Then came new hope. The U.S. Air Force flew in cave rescue experts from the National Speleological Society in Washington, D.C. These specialists had experience with similar rescue operations across the country. At the same time, a local machinist named Curtis Peck and his uncle Paul came up with an ingenious plan. They would tie strong ropes around Morris's body, pour slippery glycerin on him to reduce friction, and pull him out using a specially designed board for support. 2 dedicated firefighters, Jim and Robert Howd, helped build the harness straps according to the Peck's design. But there was still one big problem: how to get the ropes around Morris in such a tight space. The rescuers needed someone small enough to reach him. A young hero steps forward. That's when another teenager stepped up to help. 15-year-old Eagle Scout Michael Ulrich. He was about the same size as Morris and immediately volunteered when he heard about the situation. "I can fit in there," Michael said simply. "I want to help." After a brief safety explanation, Michael crawled into the narrow crack. Inch by inch, he squeezed through the same passage that had trapped Morris. When he finally reached the stuck boy, Michael could see how serious the situation was. Morris was pale, his lips had a bluish tint, and his eyes were barely open. With remarkable calm for a teenager, Michael managed to tie ropes around Morris's arms and legs. "I threw a rope on him and he pulled it over his arms," Michael explained later. "Before that, I tied a rope to one ankle and then both legs." Once the ropes were secure, Michael carefully backed out of the tight space to let the rescuers do their work. With the ropes firmly attached, the rescue team began pulling with careful, steady pressure. Morris slipped a few times, causing everyone to hold their breath in fear. But they kept trying, adjusting the angles and tension on the ropes. Finally, after several tense minutes, Morris began to move. Inch by painful inch, he slid backward out of the deadly crack that had held him for more than a day. When his body finally came free, a huge cheer erupted from the crowd outside. Rescuers quickly wrapped Morris in warm blankets and carried him out of the cave on a stretcher. The bright afternoon sunlight, something Morris had feared he might never see again, made him blink and turn his head away. The waiting crowd clapped and cheered as he was carefully loaded into an ambulance. A rescuer named Miles Lee, who helped carry Morris out, was overcome with emotion. An ordinary person would have given up or died by now, he said, wiping tears from his face. I'm not a crybaby. It's just a really good feeling to see him alive. Aftermath. At Southwest General Hospital, doctors treated Morris for exhaustion, dehydration, numerous cuts and bruises, and mild hypothermia. Despite his ordeal, he had no serious or permanent injuries. A miracle considering he had been stuck upside down for so long. After resting, Morris ate a big meal, including that promised hamburger, and personally thanked everyone who had helped save his life. When they couldn't get the ropes to me at first, I thought I was a goner, he admitted from his hospital bed. I was really scared. I thought it was hopeless. When a reporter asked if he would ever go into a cave again, Morris shook his head firmly. Not me, not for a long time. In the days that followed, park officials took drastic action to prevent similar accidents. They used dynamite to destroy the back portion of Wildcat Cave and sealed the entrance with thick concrete so no one else could ever get trapped there again. For his extraordinary bravery, Michael Ulrich received the Bronze Medal of Honor from the Carnegie Hero Fund Commission, a prestigious award given to civilians who risk their lives to save others. Life goes on today. Morris Batesold would be about 74 years old. While there aren't any recent photos or interviews with him, the dramatic rescue remains one of the most amazing examples of teamwork, courage, and never giving up in the face of seemingly impossible odds. But remember, no adventure is worth your life. Always explore with proper equipment, experienced guides, and let someone know where you're going. So, if you enjoyed this incredible rescue story, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button for more fascinating survival stories and historical events that time forgot. Now let's move on to the second horrifying cave story.
Imagine being stuck upside down in a space smaller than a washing machine for 27 hours straight, unable to move even a finger, while your heart slowly gives up fighting against gravity. This is exactly what happened to one young man, and his story will make you think twice about tight spaces forever. It was the day before Thanksgiving in 2009. John Jones was a happy 26-year-old medical student who was expecting his second child with his wife Emily. He was home in Utah for the holidays, spending time with his family. John was the kind of person everyone loved, always smiling, great with kids, and someone who put his family first in everything he did. On November 24th, John decided to go on a fun trip with his younger brother Josh and 9 other family members and friends. They wanted to explore something called Nutty Putty Cave, which was located near Salt Lake City. This cave was famous for being perfect for beginners. Thousands of people visit it every year without any problems. At least, that's what everyone thought. But this simple family trip was about to become one of the most horrifying rescue attempts in history. What happened to John Jones in that cave would be so terrible that the authorities would decide to seal the entire cave forever, with his body still inside. Let me tell you the full story. But I must warn you. If tight spaces scare you, this story might give you nightmares. Nutty Putty Cave was first found in 1960. The name sounds funny, but the cave itself was no joke. It was full of narrow tunnels, slippery rocks, and passages that twisted and turned in every direction. To get inside, you had to crawl through a hole that was only 30 inches wide. That's barely wide enough for most adults to fit through. Even though it was called a beginner's cave, Nutty Putty had a dark history. Between 1999 and 2004, many people got stuck inside its narrow passages. One 23-year-old man was trapped for more than 7 hours in almost the exact same spot where John would later get stuck. Another time, a teenager got stuck upside down for an entire night before rescuers could free him. These scary incidents made people worry about the cave's safety. local officials started calling it a ticking time bomb. They said it was only a matter of time before someone would die there. In 2006, they put a gate at the entrance and locked it shut. But cave explorers were not happy about this. They wrote angry letters to newspapers saying the government had no right to tell them what risks they could take. One person wrote, "I'm tired of the government deciding what is best for us. This cave has been a fun place for me and my sons. We should be able to decide for ourselves what is safe." The fight went on for years. Finally, in March 2009, the cave was reopened with new safety rules. Now people had to get a special permit 21 days before their visit. They also had to bring at least 2 experienced cavers in their group. This is where John Jones comes into the story. John and his brother Josh had not been inside Nutty Putty Cave before, but they had explored many other caves when they were kids. John had even helped his father, who was part of a cave rescue team. As children, John and Josh used to pretend to be trapped victims so the rescue team could practice saving people. But here's the problem. John and Josh hadn't been caving in years. Many people wonder if they really counted as the experienced cavers that the new rules required. On the evening of November 24th, at exactly 8 p.m., John's group entered the cave. At first, everything went perfectly. They spent about an hour in the biggest room of the cave, called the Big Slide. Everyone was having a great time, laughing and exploring. Then Josh and 2 friends decided to challenge each other. They wanted to go deeper into the cave and try one of the hardest parts called the birth canal. This passage was so tight that only very small people could get through it. But if you made it through, you would reach a small room on the other side. John was fit, healthy, and thin. He wasn't worried about tight spaces. He decided to go first, with Josh following behind him. John got down on his stomach and started crawling through what he thought was the entrance to the birth canal. But John had made a terrible mistake. In the darkness, he had taken a wrong turn. Instead of going toward the birth canal, he had crawled into a completely different passage called the corkscrew. This was an unmapped area where only the smallest and most flexible people could fit. As John pushed forward, the passage got tighter and tighter. Soon, he couldn't turn around. But he saw what looked like an opening at the end of the crawl space. So he kept going, thinking he could turn around once he reached it. This decision would cost John his life. John was crawling headfirst into a crack in the rock that was only 10 inches wide and 18 inches tall. To make things worse, this crack went straight down like a slide. To squeeze past a piece of rock sticking out from the wall, John had to breathe in and make his chest as small as possible. Once he got past that rock, his chest expanded again with his normal breathing. Now he was completely trapped in a space about the size of a front-loading washing machine, but he was stuck upside down with his head pointing toward the ground. John tried everything to free himself, but it was impossible. The rock that he had breathed in to get past was now pressing against his chest, making it hard to breathe. His arms were pinned to his sides. He couldn't bend his legs. He couldn't move at all. That's when he started calling for help. When Josh finally found his brother, he thought it would just be a funny story to tell later that night. But as he looked closer, he realized this was much worse than he had imagined. Josh tried desperately to pull his brother out, but nothing worked. In fact, his pulling made John slide even further down the passage. Now John was completely upside down with both arms trapped against his body. He couldn't move even a finger. Josh knew they needed help immediately. He told one friend to stay with John while he rushed out of the cave to call 911. The nearest cell phone signal was on a hill far from the cave entrance, so it took him a while to make the call. It was now about 9:30 p.m., and John had been stuck for over an hour. Help was coming, but it would take time to arrive. Josh went back into the cave to stay with his brother and wait for the rescue team. The first rescuer arrived at 12:30 a.m. Her name was Susie Motola, and she was a volunteer with the local rescue team. When she got the emergency call on her pager, she immediately drove to the cave. But when Susie crawled down to where John was trapped, she realized this was much worse than anyone had thought. Susie knew she had to keep John calm, so she spoke to him in a cheerful voice. "Hi, John. Don't worry, we'll have you out of here in no time." John replied, "Hi, Susie. Thank you for coming, but I really want to get out." Susie tried everything she could think of. She even cut off parts of John's jeans to give him a little more room. But after working for 2 hours, she was exhausted and had made no progress. She had to crawl back to the surface, where she found that John's wife Emily and their young daughter had arrived, along with about 30 rescue workers. Everyone was trying to come up with ideas. Some people suggested breaking John's legs to make him smaller. Others wanted to pour gallons of slippery oil on the walls to help slide him out. But they finally decided to use a system of ropes and pulleys to lift John out feet first. They would also drill away some of the rock around him to create more space. But there were big problems with this plan. The rock was very hard to remove, and the pieces that did come off kept falling back down onto John's head. Even worse, only one person could work in the narrow passage at a time, and it took a full hour to carry each piece of equipment down to where John was trapped, 700 feet deep inside the cave. Then the rescue team learned something that made everyone panic. A doctor named Doug Murdoch told them that being upside down for so long would kill John. The human body is designed to stand upright. When you're upside down, your heart has to fight against gravity to pump blood. After several hours, blood and other fluids start to pool in your brain and lungs, making it very hard to breathe. The doctor said John probably only had about 10 hours before his organs would start to fail. But John had already been stuck for more than 15 hours. Susie had noticed this problem early on. Within the first hour of trying to help John, she heard a rattling sound coming from his chest. This meant that fluid was already building up in his lungs, and he was starting to suffocate. The rescue team worked as fast as they could. They set up their first pulley system and started trying to lift John out of his trap. His legs and feet couldn't bend around the curve of the passage, and the piece of rock that had trapped him kept catching on his chest. As one rescuer said, it was the worst possible place to be stuck, but amazingly, they managed to lift him up just a little bit. For the first time in many hours, John was in a slightly better position. The rescue team was able to give him some fluids through an IV tube to help him stay strong. Then disaster struck. The pulley system broke, and John slid back down to where he started. He was now even more stuck than before. John was starting to panic, so the rescue team brought a radio into the cave so he could talk to his wife, Emily. She told him how much she loved him, and that everything would be okay. This helped keep John calm, while the rescuers set up a second, stronger pulley system. After 19 hours of being trapped, a team of 8 rescuers was ready to try again. They had 137 volunteers working on the rescue operation, but only a few could fit in the narrow passage where John was stuck. Each time they pulled on the ropes, John screamed in pain. They had to stop several times to avoid breaking his legs. But then, on the third pull, something amazing happened. John was lifted high enough that he could make eye contact with his rescuer. The rescuer later said that John's eyes were red and his face was dirty, but he seemed okay. When the rescuer asked how he was feeling, John said, "It sucks. I'm upside down. I can't believe I'm upside down. My legs are killing me." Even though John was complaining, the rescuers saw that he had a smile on his face. They thought they were finally going to save him. But then came the fourth pull, and everything went wrong. The system that was holding John in place suddenly failed. A bolt that had been drilled into the cave wall came loose, causing part of the cave to crumble. This hit the lead rescuer in the face, knocking him unconscious for a moment. Even worse, John slid back down into the crack, and this time he went deeper than ever before. When the rescuers recovered from the shock, they realized that John was no longer responding to them. He wasn't talking, and he seemed to be unconscious. A second rescuer took over and somehow managed to get a rope around John's waist. But this rescuer also got stuck and needed help from other team members. Several rescuers were injured trying to save John. A third rescuer made one last desperate attempt. He drilled frantically at the rock around John, trying to create enough space to pull him free. But it was too late. The entire rescue team was exhausted. John was barely breathing and was completely unresponsive. His heart had been working against gravity for so long that it finally gave up. He had gone into cardiac arrest. At this point, Emily was told what was happening. Technically, John was still alive, but he was unconscious, and his heart was failing. Emily refused to believe that her husband was dying from such a simple mistake. In one of her final radio conversations with John, she said, "I know you've been pushing so hard for so long. Why don't you rest for a minute and take a break, and then you can push again?" But the rescuers knew the truth. They sent a brave paramedic down to check John's pulse. At 11:56 p.m. on November 25, 2009, John Edward Jones was pronounced dead. He had been trapped for 28 hours. Emily was in complete shock. She couldn't believe that a simple family trip had ended with her husband's death. She refused to accept that he was really gone. The rescue team promised Emily that they would do everything possible to bring John's body back to the surface. But after discussing their options, they realized it would be impossible. Even if they could somehow free John's lifeless body, it wouldn't be able to twist and bend the way a living person could. The passage was simply too narrow and complicated. Even worse, trying to remove the body would put more rescue workers in terrible danger. The team had already been through enough. So a difficult decision was made. They would seal the entrance to Nutty Putty Cave with concrete, leaving John's body inside forever. The cave would become his tomb. John's family was heartbroken, but they understood. They had a metal plaque made and placed it at the sealed entrance. Later, they released a statement describing John as someone with a good nature, delightful sense of humor, strong work ethic, genuine love of people, masterful ability to relate to children, love of and unwavering faith in the gospel of Jesus Christ, and commitment to his family as an amazing husband, father, son, and brother. To this day, John's body remains inside Nutty Putty Cave. The cave has been permanently closed to the public since 2009. What was once a popular place for adventure seekers is now a concrete sealed tomb, serving as a reminder of how quickly a fun family trip can turn into an unimaginable tragedy. The story of John Jones shows us that even experienced people can make deadly mistakes in dangerous places. John wasn't reckless or careless. He was just a loving husband and father who wanted to have some fun with his family during the holidays. One wrong turn in the darkness changed everything. The rescue workers who tried to save John were heroes. They worked for 27 hours straight, trying everything they could think of. Many of them still have nightmares about that day. One rescuer said it was the hardest case he had worked on in 29 years of search and rescue. John's wife Emily eventually remarried and had more children, but she still visits the sealed cave entrance sometimes to remember her first husband. She has said that John would want people to learn from his story and be more careful when exploring dangerous places. The Nutty Putty Cave incident changed how people think about caving safety. Many caves now have stricter rules, better emergency equipment, and more training for rescue teams. John's death was not meaningless if it helps prevent others from facing the same fate. But perhaps the most important lesson from this story is simpler than all the safety rules and equipment. It's that we should never take our loved ones for granted. John left for what he thought would be a few hours of fun and adventure. He never came home. Life can change in an instant, and we should cherish every moment we have with the people we care about. John Edward Jones was just 26 years old when he died. He was studying to become a doctor so he could help children with heart problems. He had so much life ahead of him. Watching his daughter grow up, meeting his new baby, becoming the doctor he dreamed of being. All of that was taken away in one terrible moment when he made a wrong turn in the darkness. Today, if you drive past the place where Nutty Putty Cave used to be, you'll see nothing but a concrete seal and a small plaque. But underneath that concrete lies the body of a young man who just wanted to spend some quality time with his family during the holidays. The next time you're with your loved ones, remember John's story. Hug them a little tighter. Tell them you love them. And maybe think twice before crawling into any tight spaces underground. Some adventures just aren't worth the risk.
Now let's move on to the third horrifying cave story. When professional cave teams make amazing discoveries, it can get the attention of even people who have never been caving before. Going into caves alone is very dangerous, and most cavers say you should never do it, especially in hard caves. But sometimes the desire is too strong and the results are deadly. This is the tragic story of the Veryovkina Cave disaster. Dmitri Volkov had been gathering information about the Veryovkina Cave for almost a year. He was a 39-year-old married man with 2 children who loved adventure sports. This cave had recently been declared the deepest on Earth at over 7,200 feet deep. There is a horizontal cave network at the bottom that extends for half a mile with a maze of tunnels and water-filled passages. Although he had only been caving 3 times before, this incredibly difficult cave became an obsession he could not ignore. The extreme depth of this cave required multiple overnight stops to reach the bottom. Permanent camps were set up by the Veryovkina caving team from Russia. This group had explored the cave system many times and continued to make new discoveries of depth and passages over several years. This team worked in large groups with extensive planning for each expedition. Dmitri had learned about their most recent trip, which almost ended in disaster in 2019. The Veryovkina caving team was on an expedition with a National Geographic photographer named Robert Shane when a massive flood of water rushed through to the lowest part of the cave. A group of 9 were in the deepest base camp after a 5-day journey to the bottom of the deep cave system. A wall of water came in that sounded like a speeding train. The group retreated to their camp to wait out the flow where it was expected to drain down through the cave tunnels and pose no danger to their camp. A bubbling sound was heard from behind their shelter, and a quick check revealed an overflowing hole. The lower levels were already filled, and the water was now rising in their chamber. They had only minutes to grab the most important items and escape to higher ground. This meant climbing up a narrow vertical passage through a raging river of water. The Russian caving team felt confident and calm about such an escape, but Robert Shane felt no such comfort. He was as scared as he had ever been in his life, truly uncertain if he would survive this unexpected emergency. Climbing up the rope in a flood of water was bad enough, but squeezing through the narrow opening where it was rushing from was physically painful. He tucked his head down to allow himself to breathe while moving up the rope through the tight passage. The water beating on his helmet felt like a weight pushing his head into his shoulders. The entire group made it up to the next camp but was trapped there for 18 hours waiting for the water flood to go down. The entire lower level was completely flooded and would have meant certain death for anyone who did not escape in time. Dmitri had heard about the frightening story which was told in many versions, including a National Geographic article with pictures from Robert Shane. Dmitri had studied these pictures, collected maps, and taken screenshots on his phone of several items related to exploring this cave. For most people, the near-death experience of the Russian group would have put Veryovkina off limits, but not Dmitri. He was an adventurous person who liked to hike, climb, and run marathons. His wife and children did not know about his plans to visit the deepest cave on Earth. He only said that he was going to find the meaning of life and would be back in about a week. On October 15th, 2020, Dmitri drove several hours from his home in Sochi, Russia to the Veryovkina Cave. It was quite a hike up the side of a mountain just to get to the entrance of the cave. He used new climbing spikes and walking poles to make his way up the mountain to the entrance. Dmitri was familiar with climbing and brought some basic equipment for the cave adventure. The first drop would require him to set up a rappelling rope from the top of the cave entrance to lower into the main shaft of the cave. It was here that he left his fabric backpack and moved his equipment and food to waterproof bags to carry deep into the cave. He was expecting to encounter some wet passages and flows of water in various parts of the descent. He marked his map where water was expected but did not bring any waterproof clothes. The map he had printed out showed the main camps that were established by the Veryovkina team. He did not have permission to be in the cave and certainly not to use their equipment left in the permanent camps. Nonetheless, he was planning to use their base camps to rest between the climbs down to the bottom over a mile deep into the mountain. He had notes on his map with information he had gathered about particular passages, problem areas, and times expected to travel through each section. The Veryovkina team had extensive preparations, massive stocks of supplies, installed communications, and large teams of climbers to ensure safety for the 4 or 5 day climb to the bottom of the cave. Dmitri had just himself and the supplies he carried on his back. It seems that he thought he was prepared for what he would encounter at Veryovkina, but he was wrong. The first part of the descent was through very narrow and tight cave passages. This would be over 3,700 feet of difficult caving with several bags of supplies to drag behind and push through the tight squeezes. Dmitri reached the first camp at 1,200 feet. This camp is the staging area for making the largest vertical drop in the entire cave system. The Baba Tunda pit is an incredible 480 feet deep. This requires a rope descent without access to any ledges or stops. It goes straight to the bottom in this huge cavern. The PST team had a rope system left in place where a climber could lower themselves into the pit using a friction rope descent, then use hand ascenders with foot loops to climb back up. He noted that it would take him 7 hours to go from the entrance well to the bottom of the pit. His notes also show that he thought the trip back would take 3 more hours than the trip down this pit. For Dmitri, it must have been a frightening prospect looking down into the incredible depth. He decided to reorganize his bags and left one of the less important bags at Camp 1. The PST team had a huge lighting setup for the entire team to see each other. Dmitri would have had his own single headlamp with a limited range. As Dmitri lowered himself into the pit, he may have been completely excited finding the adventure he was seeking. Or he may have felt stressed by seeing the condition of the drop. No wall climbing or rappelling, but center isolation that would make going back up a real challenge. No matter his feelings, Dmitri lowered himself in the pit using the PST setup and continued on the hike down into the cave system. The bottom of the pit ended just a few hundred feet from Camp 2 at 1,900 feet. Camp 2 was a permanent camp set up by the Perovo-Spileo team. They left the camps largely cleared out, but did leave some items for long-term storage. There was a tent, gas for heat and cooking, as well as a few non-perishable items of food like sauce packets. The strange thing about Dmitri's trip is that he was planning to be gone a week. Theoretically enough time to travel to the bottom and back up according to the large PST team's timeline. It was clear that he ended up spending about 7 or 8 days in Camp 2 at a depth of 1,900 feet. It is likely that at this point he was concerned about the trip back up the Babatunda pit. His descent into the pit might have started easily enough, but 480 feet is a long way for a controlled descent. He would have been fresh and strong, allowing him to muscle his way through the exhausting effort. But clearly, Dmitri found himself in a devastating position. He realized too late that he had either forgotten or miscalculated an essential component of his climbing gear. He had no foot straps. Over several days, Dmitri likely attempted ascending in every way he could imagine. He probably attempted rock climbing around the perimeter, but that was impossible with the angles, distance, and equipment he had. A pure climbing of the rope with only hand ascenders is just not possible. Pulling your body weight up over and over without the assistance of your lower body and place to rest along the way is an impossible feat. Dmitri was using up his food resources in Camp 2 and did not have the proper equipment to go back up. The 7 days he spent at this camp were probably filled with heroic efforts to try to ascend and exhausted periods of time where he rested and tried to recover. His only options at this point were to wait out a rescue or find a way to climb out. No one even knew he was in this cave, and it was rarely visited, so waiting around would mean starving or freezing to death once the gas ran out. As for climbing out, he had spent days trying everything he could to get out. Each day left him weaker and weaker with little food remaining. No matter his reasoning, Dmitri decided to descend to the next camp. After at least 7 days at Camp 2, he probably was looking for food and additional climbing equipment. If he could just locate a pair of foot loops and a little food, then he could possibly climb 3,100 feet back to the top. The trip down from Camp 2 to Camp 3 would have been extremely difficult for someone not in peak physical condition. The PST team might have made this descent in 5 hours, but alone and weak, Dmitri probably struggled to reach this depth at 3,100 feet. But Dmitri did make it to Camp 3. It was a small victory, but was not the salvation that he hoped for. Camp 3 did not have any food or supplies that could help him. We do not know how long he stayed at this camp, but it would not have been for long. He was probably wet, cold, hungry, and exhausted. The only chance to survive and save himself would be to go even lower into the cave system. He had his map and knew that there was another camp a little over 900 feet below. He was probably completely spent, but had the will to survive pulling him along. Surely thoughts of his family would have made him fight through the desire to just sit still and fall asleep. At this depth in the cave, water was a constant issue. The trickle up above became a spray of water in some passages and a waterfall in others. With 100% humidity in the cave, he was not able to dry himself. He was wearing cotton work clothes and did not bring the proper dry suit for this kind of caving. At just 40 degrees, the cave and water temperature kept him in mild hypothermia. Without heat from the gas lamps up in the previous camp, Dmitri had to keep moving if he wanted to prevent severe hypothermia. But he was exhausted and had no food for energy. The only solution was to keep going. Dmitri got his gear together and lowered himself off the ledge. Exactly what happened over the next 280 feet is unknown. It is generally thought that Dmitri succumbed to hypothermia. He would have been wet in cotton clothes trying to lower himself on ropes in the incredibly cold environment of such a deep, wet cave system. Some think he may have fallen in his weakened state. He was wearing a cave helmet to protect his head, but the circumstances were just impossible. No matter the final straw that cost him his life, his wife started to worry after he did not return within a week as planned. She alerted authorities that he had not returned, but she had no idea where he went caving. The Veryovkina Cave was over 3 hours from his house, and he did not make the proper request to explore this cave. Months passed, and it seemed that something terrible must have happened. It was fully 10 months later in August of 2021 when the PST team was ready for a new expedition into the cave. When they arrived at Veryovkina, they saw a rope dropped over the entrance ledge, which was highly improper. Leaving a rope at the entrance was against protocol since anyone might mistake it for an invitation into the challenging cave. The team moved into the cave and followed their normal pathways to climb down to the first camp. Along the way, they came across a set of walking poles and climbing spikes as well as a fabric backpack. It was clear that someone had been here. At the next camp, the evidence of an unauthorized caver was everywhere. Missing food, empty packaging, and open storage boxes made it clear that someone had stayed at the camp for a while. Judging by the evidence in the portable toilet, it looked like someone had spent 7 or 8 days at the camp. The team was a little annoyed, but also concerned. Was this climber still here in the cave? They would unfortunately find out on their trek to the bottom. At the 3,380 feet mark, there was a body hanging from their ropes, and clearly it had been there for a long time. The team was devastated to find that the caver was dead. His body was folded to the side, dangling from the ascenders he had connected to the main rope. Below him were 2 plastic caving bags. He had 2 cell phones with him and a multi-tool knife. The team could quickly see that he was ill-equipped for this type of expedition. He was not properly dressed, had no backup equipment in case of failure, and had no foot loops attached to his ascenders. The team took his cell phones and were able to find pictures that could be sent to authorities to identify the man. The terrible reality for his wife was compounded by the fact that they could not just pull his body out of the cave for burial. The grueling ascent was a serious challenge for any individual, and there just was not a way to lift him out through tight squeezes, curving tunnels, and long rope climbing ascents. The only solution was to dismember his body into manageable pieces that could be transported safely. After getting the funding and permission to do so, a team of over 90 people prepared his body and slowly lifted the pieces out of the deep cave. His wife finally had some answers as to what had happened to Dmitri and was able to lay his body to rest after a 10-month-long wait. Exactly what happened to Dmitri in that cave is not known. He left evidence behind on his cell phones, on his body, and in the camps. The position of his body and the supplies he had with him helped to form a story around what likely happened. There are other scenarios that may have resulted in the same evidence being left behind, but the conclusion rests on the most obvious pathway. His internal thoughts cannot be known, but we can certainly empathize with how he must have felt. He attempted an incredible challenge and unfortunately lost his life. The tragedy serves as a stark reminder of the dangers that await those who venture into the Earth's deepest places without proper preparation, equipment, and support. Cave exploration requires extensive training, proper equipment, and most importantly, never going alone. The depths of Veryovkina Cave continue to attract adventurers from around the world. But Dmitri's story stands as a warning about the deadly consequences of underestimating one of nature's most unforgiving environments. The cave remains active with scientific expeditions, but strict protocols are now in place to prevent unauthorized access. The Russian caving community has used this tragedy as a teaching moment, emphasizing the importance of proper planning, equipment checks, and never attempting solo descents in technical cave systems. Dmitri's family has found some peace knowing what happened to their loved one, though the pain of his loss remains. His story has become part of the cave's dark history, joining the tales of other adventurers who pushed too far into the unknown depths of our planet. The Veryovkina Cave continues to hold its secrets, but it has claimed its price for those who dare to challenge its depths without the respect and preparation it demands. For the caving community, Dmitri's tragedy serves as a constant reminder that the call of adventure must always be balanced with the wisdom of safety and preparation. Now let's move on to the fourth horrifying cave disaster story.
Picture this. A man goes into a dark cave looking for treasure and gets stuck. But not just stuck for an hour or two. Stuck for 17 days. Buried alive underground while the whole world watches. This is the shocking true story of Floyd Collins, and what happened to him will make your skin crawl. It was January 30th, 1925, and Floyd Collins was feeling great. After weeks of hard work, he had broken through to a secret room in Sand Cave, Kentucky. This narrow, twisted tunnel had been his project for so long. He spent days pulling out rocks and dirt just to squeeze through a tiny crack. Floyd pushed himself through that crack and slid down 8 feet to the floor of a huge room. He planned to turn this into a place where people would pay money to visit. This was Floyd's big dream coming true. But then something went wrong. His gas lamp was running out of fuel. Floyd had to get out fast. He climbed back up and pulled his body through the narrow crack. When he pushed the lamp forward, the rough surface caught it and flipped it over. The light went out. Floyd would have to travel back in complete darkness. He lay on his back and used his legs to slide across the sharp rocks below. He put his foot on the wall and pushed his body back. Suddenly there was a loud rumbling sound. Rocks and dust filled the tight tunnel. Floyd screamed in pain as he choked on the falling dust. The rocks kept falling as he struggled, trying to move his left leg from what felt like a trap holding his ankle. Then he realized something terrible. His arms were trapped just as tight as his legs. Floyd was buried in a tunnel only 16 inches high, over 140 feet into the earth. The pain was shocking, but this was not the first time Floyd had been trapped in a cave. Just 1 year before, it took 2 days to get him out of Crystal Cave. But this time, he was all alone. It was Friday morning, and he did not expect anyone to come looking for him soon. He tried hard to fight against the pile of rocks, but his left foot would not move at all. It was trapped under a large rock. His arms were stuck in rocks and dirt packed around his body. Floyd took deep breaths to calm down and started the long wait. Someone would come looking and see his jacket hanging outside the cave entrance. The complete darkness and silence made the water dripping on his face extra annoying. A slow drip hit his face every few minutes. After hours of fighting against rocks that would not move, He fell asleep to escape this nightmare for a while. When Floyd woke up, he was shocked by his situation. It was completely black, and his face was wet with no way to reach up and wipe the water away. He shook his head back and forth, which was the only movement he could make. He screamed on and off, hoping someone might hear him. The landowner's teenage son went to check on Floyd since he never came back. Jewel Estes saw Floyd's coat and slid inside the cave entrance. He called out to Floyd, and a very relieved Floyd called back that he needed help. Jewel was small, but did not know caves well. He could hear Floyd, but did not have the courage to go deeper. Floyd sent Jewel to get adults who knew rescue work. Even though Floyd was hungry and thirsty, he felt better that someone knew where he was. More than 24 hours had passed in this position. The water kept dripping on his face, and the terrible pain in his foot never stopped. One of his brothers made it to the cave but could not reach where Floyd was trapped. After more than 100 feet of crawling, he was looking at a hole just under 9 inches high and as wide as a sheet of paper. It was impossible for bigger men to get through. They sent for Floyd's younger brother, Homer. At 22, he was small and had cave experience with Floyd. It was 4 o'clock Saturday afternoon when Homer arrived. He realized his brother had been without food or water for 30 hours and was in serious trouble. Homer squeezed through 100 feet of passage to the narrow, blocked area. Others had turned around here, but Homer had no choice. His brother was stuck on the other side of this little hole. Homer had to push forward with his toes while scraping along his belly. The slide down to Floyd was just 10 feet, but very narrow. The tunnel would hold his body straight up, making it hard to bend down and help Floyd. Still, Floyd was happy to finally see someone. Homer slid down to help but found the situation shocking. Floyd was buried up to his chest in broken rocks. Because everything was so tight, Homer could not just reach in and pull rocks out. There was nowhere to move them to. Homer brought coffee and sausage to Floyd, giving Floyd new energy knowing his family was here to save him. Homer moved up and down trying to pull Floyd, move rocks to free his arm, and dig out the floor. Since no one else could squeeze through the hole, Homer was on his own. Each time he pulled away a rock, more fell from above. Homer was desperate and worked on and off for the next 16 hours. It was 8 o'clock Sunday morning when Homer came out. He needed help because he could barely walk from all the hard work. He fell down and begged someone to go help dig his brother out. A crowd had started to build while Homer was underground. Word had spread that Floyd was really trapped this time, and local people began gathering to help. Several men worked into the cave tunnels but came to the narrow opening. A few were so scared they turned back right away. It looked like a falling hole of big rocks. All day Sunday, the growing crowd talked about ways to get Floyd free, but no one could get through the small squeeze. The entire day, no one reached Floyd to give him water, food, or comfort. It was now 3 full days of being trapped. This was shocking to Floyd. His situation was not better. His arms were still trapped, his foot was still crushed, and there seemed to be no plan to get him out. Floyd was feeling weak and cold, lying in a pool of cold, muddy water and sharp rocks. News had traveled that a man was stuck in a cave for 3 days, so reporter William Miller showed up. Hundreds of people had started showing up just to stare at the rescue teams, and it had become quite a show. Miller crawled through the twisting tunnel until he came to the narrow opening. He was shocked by the size of the rocky hole. It was barely bigger than a sheet of paper. Luckily, Miller was thin, weighing only 117 pounds. Miller pulled his chest and hips through the opening with twisting and bending. The path on the other side was less than 16 inches high, so he crawled forward to a small ledge. He could see over the edge was a 10-foot drop to where Floyd was trapped. Floyd's face was covered with cloth, which Miller quickly took off. Right away, Floyd asked him to put it back. The torture of water drops had been steady for 3 days, and he could not take it anymore. Miller asked questions and gave Floyd a drink before climbing back up. Miller was shocked. He had never seen such a hopeless situation. Once out, he wrote his story and sent it over the news wires. The news story took off, and the whole nation was interested in the man stuck in the cave. A local firefighter, Lieutenant Robert Burton, showed up with a plan. He was going to pull Floyd free with ropes and a harness. Burton squeezed into the narrow shaft, becoming just the third person to reach Floyd face to face. He was amazed at Floyd's terrible situation. Burton struggled to wrap the harness around Floyd's chest because very little of Floyd was showing. The 3 men pulled with everything they had while Floyd screamed in terrible pain. Unfortunately, the effort failed and mostly pressed Floyd's face and chest against sharp rocks. They were literally crushing him. It was Monday, and another plan had failed. At 9 o'clock that night, Floyd's longtime friend Johnny Gerald arrived. He was sure Floyd would get out because he always had before. Johnny was an experienced cave person, so when Floyd heard his old friend was here, he yelled out with relief. Johnny jammed his body through the tiny hole, moving small rocks as he went. The dusty dirt falling around him was frightening. He belly crawled to the ledge and looked down to see his old friend at the bottom. Floyd felt the first moment of joy in days. Johnny tried to slide down feet first, but was stuck in the narrow shaft. It was clear he would not fit. Johnny could hear how desperate Floyd sounded and could not bear to leave. Johnny spent the next 3 hours chipping away rock in the narrow shaft, carefully catching pieces to prevent hitting Floyd below. By midnight, Johnny was tired, but ready to try again. This time, he was able to slide down and reach Floyd. For the next 6 hours, Johnny put his strength to good use. He filled buckets with rocks and stones that had buried Floyd's chest. Each effort required him to press his head at a weird angle to reach into Floyd's tunnel. After a terrible 6 hours, Johnny had gone as far as he could. His stocky body could not reach any farther than Floyd's upper thigh area. It was early Tuesday morning, and Johnny headed back up to rest. After Johnny left, Floyd lay alone in his narrow tunnel for the next 12 hours. It seemed like progress had been made, but the main problem still existed. No matter how hard he pulled or twisted, his foot would not move. He was cold and truly afraid, lying in 50-degree muddy water. Floyd had been stuck for more than 4 full days and had not seen the sun since Friday morning. He was feeling strange and starting to see things that were not there, like angels and dreams of sleeping in his own bed. Miller realized he was among the few who could reach Floyd, so he gathered cave workers and decided to continue Johnny's work. At 5:30 Tuesday evening, he returned to the narrow shaft and used a bucket to continue taking out loose rocks around Floyd's legs. Miller was steadily clearing bucket after bucket until he could get a better look at the rock causing the problem. Workers had put lights through the tunnel. This extra lighting showed what had not been understood until now. The rock was not just heavy and pressing on Floyd's foot. It had slipped down into the crack of the cave below. This created a wedge that trapped the rock so tightly that neither pushing nor pulling would move it. Of all their supplies, the only thing that could fit into the tiny hole was a crowbar and a small jack. Miller was running on pure energy and felt hope that Floyd might be free in just a few hours. The jack and crowbar were slowly pushed into the end of the tunnel near Floyd's feet. Miller could not reach that far, but pushed with his fingertips to slide the jack in place. He slowly turned the handle to try to raise the platform to the rock's edge. It was very slow work, leaning forward and reaching out with fingertips. His back hurt badly while trying to make it work. Floyd's quiet, calming words stayed in his mind. Gently, Floyd encouraged him. "You can do it, fella. I believe in you, fella." At one point, the jack had a good grip on the rock's edge, and Miller turned it, sensing the rock was starting to lift. Then the whole thing fell apart with a quiet clank. He tried again and again, each time making small changes but never moving the rock. At 1 o'clock in the morning, after 8 long hours of trying, he fell down with exhaustion. He was completely beaten. He wrapped the last light bulb around Floyd's neck for warmth and went back to the surface. It was now Wednesday, February 4th. Workers were trying to figure out if they could make the tiny hole wider when a frightening rumbling was heard from within. Workers told the team above there had been a cave-in. The entire tunnel was not stable, and anyone going inside would be risking their life. Johnny Gerald again offered to go inside. He got to the area of the cave-in and got to work moving rocks. It seemed hopeless with problem after problem. One rock at a time was carefully pulled away. This effort took more than 8 hours. Just when he did not think he could move anymore, he was able to make a small opening that showed the light still glowing inside. Floyd was still talking, though he seemed weaker after nearly 6 days of being trapped. It was 10:30 at night, and finally the path was opened once again. Johnny went out to collect tools to chip away at the rock on Floyd's foot. They were confident this would be the successful effort to get Floyd out alive. They crawled through to the narrow room and were shocked by what they saw. The ceiling had poured into the narrow passage leading down to Floyd. The cave-in was bigger and heavier than before. With the melting snow, the walls and ceiling had swelled, and the weight could not be held back. Johnny yelled out to Floyd, and Floyd returned the call. He was alive, and Johnny could not just leave him there. The walls seemed to be moving and breathing, ready to bury him at any moment. The other men backed out of this area. Johnny was alone, digging in the pile of dirt. It was sickening. If he turned and left, he would basically be abandoning his friend's only chance at rescue. He scooped out the new pieces in the hole, and it just refilled from an endless source above. Larger rocks started falling down the pile. It was truly a death trap. Johnny made the hardest decision of his life, but he had a family of his own. He went back to the entrance while new piles of stones and rock piled up in the path. He sat down and cried. He was done. It was now clear that although Floyd was still alive inside the tight tunnel, climbing in to rescue him would not be survivable. The governor brought in the National Guard, and the state took control of the rescue effort with a plan to dig a hole straight down to Floyd's location. On Thursday, February 5th, the 7th day of Floyd's trap, digging began. They were hopeful, expecting to reach Floyd within 30 hours. They needed to dig a shaft down 55 feet, then dig sideways to reach the narrow passage leading to Floyd. The excitement faded as hours turned into days and progress slowed. There were problems with equipment, collapses, hard soil, heavy rains, and arguments between people. This 30-hour dig stretched over the next 12 days. Yes, 12 full days of digging. During this time, there were news stories and radio shows about Floyd. As they got closer, It was thought they heard coughing deep in the shaft, keeping hopes alive that Floyd may still be living. He had a trickle of water, so it was possible for him to survive. The light bulb that had been hung around his neck was being watched for changes in the electrical signal. It was thought there was some interference with the electricity each time Floyd breathed. For days, they watched the scratchy interference coming through nearly 20 times a minute. This bulb was also helping to keep Floyd a bit warmer. On Friday, February 13th, the bulb that had been keeping Floyd warm burned out. There was no more signal on the line of any kind. It was 2 full weeks that Floyd had been trapped in suffering, an amazing amount of time under such a nightmare. The shaft diggers continued until Monday, February 16th, when they finally broke through the tunnel and entered the cave shaft. The first man through was only a few feet from Floyd. It was quickly determined that Floyd was dead. The coroner came down and officially declared him dead. He stated that Floyd had lived for around 14 days trapped in the tunnel. He appeared to have only been dead for 3 days. It was stunning. After the final cave-in, Floyd had just laid alone in the cave with only a trickle of water and the use of one arm for 9 days before he died. Floyd was an eager and talented cave explorer in a time when it would have meant everything to his family if he could discover a touring cave. He worked 12 hours a day for weeks trying to find that one special place he could turn into a business. In the end, he found exactly what he was looking for, because Sand Cave became a household name, along with Floyd Collins. The nation mourned his death and was horrified by the way it dragged on in a painful and drawn-out manner. The passion of his family, friends, and even strangers to help Floyd escape was truly powerful. Their heroic efforts should be remembered along with Floyd's life and passion.